This is Heart of the Guardians, where forgotten love stories and untold human emotions come to life. If you're new here, make sure to stay till the end, because what you're about to hear will remind you that love can bloom even in the darkest corners of cruelty. Our story begins in the burning heart of the 18th century, in a remote desert kingdom where power meant everything, and compassion meant nothing. The palace of Emir Rashid stood tall, carved from white stone, gleaming beneath the sun like a mirage. He was a man of wealth, influence, and merciless pride. To his people, he was a god. To his wives, he was a storm. Among them was Layla, once known across the land as the Flower of Damascus. She had been the emir's favorite bride, chosen not for her dowry, but for her grace and quiet strength. Her beauty had drawn him like a moth to flame. But years passed, and her face began to change, not from age, but from sorrow. In a world where women were prized for youth and perfection, Layla's gentleness was mistaken for weakness. When her beauty faded in Rashid's eyes, so did her worth. It began with silence, the kind that fills grand halls when love dies. He stopped looking at her. Then he stopped speaking to her. Eventually, he stopped remembering she existed. The younger wives laughed behind her back. The servants whispered. They said, "The emir grows tired of old roses." One evening, when the air was thick with incense and jealousy, the emir's youngest wife made a cruel suggestion. "She's too old to sit at your table," she purred. "Why not give her to one of the slaves? Let her live among those she resembles now, forgotten, used, and discarded." Rashid smirked, not out of cruelty, but out of vanity. To prove that he could do whatever he pleased. So, before the moon had set, the order was given. Layla, once the jewel of the palace, was stripped of her silks, her jewels, her title. She was led barefoot into the servants' quarters, her tears falling silently onto the cold floor. There, among the lowliest of men, she was given to a slave, Malik. Malik had once been a free man, a warrior from a rival tribe, captured years ago after a battle he'd lost. His back bore the scars of 100 lashes, but his eyes still carried the fire of dignity. When the guards shoved Layla toward him, Malik was stunned. He bowed, confused, whispering, "My lady, this must be some mistake." But there was no mistake. The emir's command was final. Layla belonged to him now, not as a wife, but as punishment. The palace laughed for days. The humiliation of Layla became entertainment. The women mocked her, the men pitied her, and the emir never spoke her name again. But that night, inside the small stone cell where Malik lived, something unexpected happened. Layla sat silently in the corner, trembling. Malik placed a blanket beside her, keeping his distance. He spoke softly, "I will never touch you without your wish. You are still who you were, even if the world forgets it." She looked up, her eyes swollen with grief. "I am no one now." He shook his head. "Then I will remember you until you are someone again." From that moment, the walls that divided them, power, rank, pride, began to crumble. Malik treated her not as property, but as a queen. He cooked for her when he could. He gave her the better portion of food. He cleaned the floor so her feet wouldn't have to touch the cold stone. Days turned into weeks, and something unspoken began to grow between them, something forbidden, yet pure. Layla, who had once been surrounded by servants, now found herself serving beside one, washing dishes, tending fires, listening to his quiet laughter. She saw in Malik's eyes what she had never seen in the emir's, kindness without condition. One night, as rain began to fall over the desert, a rare and sacred thing, Malik found her weeping silently. He knelt before her, his voice low. "Why do you cry?" She smiled bitterly. "Because I don't know if I should thank God for sending you, or hate him for making me lose everything first." Malik looked at her, then said something that stayed with her forever. "Maybe he had to break your cage, to show you what freedom feels like." For the first time in years, Layla laughed. And Malik, the slave who owned nothing, felt richer than the emir who owned everything. Their love grew in the shadows, hidden from the eyes of cruelty. When they spoke, it was in whispers. When they touched, it was with trembling hands, afraid and yet unashamed. In that tiny, forgotten cell, Layla rediscovered what it meant to be alive. But in the palace above, jealousy stirred again. The youngest wife, who had orchestrated Layla's fall, noticed her absence of despair. She sent her spies to watch, and one night, they returned with what they saw, a slave holding the former wife in his arms. It was all the proof she needed. The next morning, Malik was dragged through the palace courtyard, beaten and bleeding. Layla was thrown at the emir's feet. "Did you think," Rashid roared, "that you could disgrace me? That I would let a slave touch what once belonged to me?" Layla raised her head, her voice steady. "You gave me away, my lord. I became what you made me. But he gave me back my soul." Gasps filled the room. No one had ever spoken to the emir like that. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Rashid's eyes burned with rage. "Then you shall die with your slave," he said coldly. Layla did not flinch. Malik, barely conscious, struggled to rise. "If she must die," he whispered, "let me die first." Something in that moment, in the raw defiance of a man with nothing left to lose, shook even Rashid's pride. He turned away, torn between anger and shame. "Take them away," he muttered. "Banish them. Let the desert finish what I will not." So they were cast out, barefoot, wounded, with only the stars to guide them. For 3 days they wandered through the dunes, living on nothing but water from broken clay jars and the strength of their love. Layla tended Malik's wounds, her once soft hands rough from sand and sun. On the 4th day, they reached a small oasis, a forgotten village of freed slaves and wanderers. There, for the first time, they were safe. The villagers took them in. Malik worked as a shepherd. Layla healed the sick with herbs and kindness. In the evenings, they would sit beneath the palm trees, and she would rest her head on his shoulder, whispering, "I used to live in a palace, but I never felt this rich." Years passed. The palace that had once imprisoned her fell into decay. Rashid died without heirs, his name remembered only with bitterness. But Layla and Malik lived on, not as queen and slave, but as man and woman bound by a love that no power could destroy. When Malik died, his last words were, "You were never a punishment. You were my salvation." And when Layla's time came, the villagers buried her beside him. On the shared grave, they carved a simple line, "Here rest two souls who found freedom in each other." Many years later, travelers would find the small oasis, now called the Garden of Layla. They would tell the story of the woman too old to be loved, and the slave who proved them wrong. Because love, they said, is not given by power, it's given by grace. And no man, not even an emir, can take that away. This has been Heart of the Guardians, stories that remind us that even when the world forgets you, love remembers. If this story touched you, share it, let it travel far, and keep the flame alive. Because somewhere out there, another heart might need to believe in love again.